Hey, friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is my buddy Barry Walsh. He's going to share some stories about touring with Roy Orbison.
So in the 80s, I was doing, trying to get a foothold in the studio, scene, trying to break into that scene. So I was doing a lot of demos for people, but it wasn't enough to sustain a living. And so I was taking these road gigs, and they kept escalating through the 80s. I'd worked for like in 81 or so. I worked with Jeannie Seeley on the Opry for a year, and then Lynn Anderson's people called me, and I did that gig for a year. And then Dottie West's band leader called me, and I did that gig for a couple of years. Actually, I became the band leader for that gig, and I was doing that when Waylon's people called me, and I got that gig, did that for 5 years. But in between all that, I had a friend who was playing with Roy Orbison on the road, and I was always envious of him because it was such a great band. Kenny Buttrey was playing drums, and Jimmy Johnson was the bass player, was a great bass player, and Bucky Barrett was the guitar player. So anyway, this guy that was a friend of mine was playing keys with Roy Orbison, and he would take off every once in a while to do, semi-important things like get married and this and that. And so I remember that was the last gig I did with Roy, was that he was getting married on, well, it was during Mardi Gras. And Roy had a gig booked at Mardi Gras in New Orleans. So that was probably in 88, the year Roy died, because he died in December, if I remember right. So that would have been like February of that year. And that's the last time I saw Roy. But we went down in the bus, and I remember I knew by then that Roy was a big fan of spy movies. So this was back in the days of the VHS tapes, and I had just seen this great spy movie that I loved, Kevin Costner in No Way Out. So I brought the VHS tape with me, and when we got on the bus, I handed it to Roy, and I said, I hear you like spy movies, so here, try this one out. So Roy went back to the back of in his stateroom in the back of the bus and disappeared for a couple of hours. This is on the way to New Orleans. And then he came back up in the front of the bus when he finished the movie, and he handed me the tape back, and he said, son, that's the best spy movie I ever saw. So I thought, oh my God, I made Roy Orbison happy. I can die a happy man now, you know. But and the other thing about Roy was that I remember was that after the first time I ever did a gig with him, he came up to the front of the bus after the show. We were up back on the bus, and he said, son, that's the best anybody's played my show since Floyd Kramer played with me. And I was like, oh, I'm sure that's not true, but nice of you to say that, you know. But that's the kind of guy he was. Super nice guy. One of the nicest people I've ever met. Soft-spoken, shy, total sweetheart. His hobby was flying model airplanes with his bus driver Benny. I forget Benny's last name, but Benny and Roy would go to the model airplane field down Neely's Bend Road in Madison at the end, and they would go hang out there and fly model planes around. Yeah, that was his thing. That was his hobby. To finish that New Orleans story, so we're driving. This is one of the most incredible gigs I ever did, really. So we get down there, and we're playing in the Superdome during Mardi Gras. So we're on a show with Gloria Estefan, Smokey Robinson, and Dolly Parton at the Superdome. So we're on stage during our part of that show, and they opened the doors to the Superdome, and the infield was not. They didn't have seats on the infield, and I didn't know why until the doors opened, and one of the parades came in, the Endymion parade from Mardi Gras, came in. I mean, horse-drawn carriages and big floats and all this stuff, and they paraded around the infield of the Superdome, and they got in front of the stage and threw the beads out, like they did out in the street, and it was like, man, my mind was blown. I thought, wow, I'll never forget this. That's one of the highlights of my life, was playing with Roy Orbison, because he was the best singer I ever heard. I remember playing on stage, and I was always on stage right, playing with him. And at the end of things like "It's Over" or something, when he'd hit those operatic high notes, and I would hit the note and go, "Oh my God, he's hitting a C sharp in full voice. This is incredible," And I'd look over to him, and I'd look at his head and his neck, and there was never any tension. You know how singers, when they hit really high notes, can tense up? I mean, you can see like Springsteen, just like his neck, his veins are bulging, and he's like pushing. And Roy was like Dylan said of him, he was an opera singer, and he really was. I mean, that tone, that sound came out of his throat without any resistance, and it was just this beautiful thing. And I looked over, and there was no tension in his neck, no tension in his throat, and he was hitting these incredibly high notes. You know.
Well, what was the volume like coming out of his mouth? Was he a quiet singer? Was it really loud?
I don't think it was super loud, and I think that's why he could do it. I mean, I know other great singers, like Bryan Adams is that way. Bryan Adams does not have a really loud vocal. You know, Gretchen has told me, she's worked with him a lot, and when she's in the studio with him, he's singing on a mic, and she's amazed because it's all about tone. It's not about pushing air out or anything like this. If that was the case, he wouldn't be able to sing like he does for 2 or 3 hours, you know. Yeah. And I suspect somebody like Springsteen is like that too. But Roy was totally like that. I mean, it was such a natural thing. I'd never got the feeling that he had to scream or shout. It was just this natural thing, you know, that came out of his sound, that came out of his throat. I know, it was an out-of-body experience. So like I said, I was on stage right looking over and go, this is pretty cool. I'm going to have to remember this, you know. And it happened, you know, I probably worked with him a half dozen times, and it was always the same. It was always just amazing, you know.